All right, hello everyone. We are back with episode 5 of Washed Up. It's been a bit of a hectic week. I caught the flu about Thursday, so I've been kind of in the gutter, but I'm recording on Monday of this week because yesterday was also the Super Bowl, so we'll have some commentary on that. But yeah, big week up ahead, lots to get to. Abby, how was your week this past week?
Yes, I also think that the news was a little better this week. Colin and I were kind of joking that this is kind of just a new normal. Otherwise, everything's been good. I didn't have the flu, but I know it's going around my office and a few others, so I'm sorry to hear that you had that too.
I hope it wasn't the bird flu, but I don't think it was. I think it was just the regular flu. But also, it was my birthday this past week, and not the worst birthday I've ever had. But it reminded me of a couple years ago when I was in COVID quarantine at USD on my birthday with COVID. So, yeah, not quite that bad, but it did kind of give me a little bit of a flashback because I was pretty ill both times.
You are the third person that I know who was quarantined on their birthday at USD. That's
It's
so
kind
funny.
of my villain origin story, if I'm being honest, but I'm gonna save that story for a whole nother day. But
Yeah.
actually, it wasn't too bad because I got to listen to some audiobooks that I've been meaning to get to. So, I listened to Deception by Rand Paul, which is kind of about, ironically, the origins of COVID. And because I remember I brought this up about like 2 episodes ago, like when did Dr. Fauci know
Right.
that COVID might have been likely from the lab versus, the wet market narrative? The
Yeah.
date that he has in his book is the last day of January 2020. So that was like very, very early on. There was like this consensus behind the scenes that like COVID probably came out of the lab. So I just thought that was interesting. Something I learned while I was sick with the flu.
Better than me, because if I had the flu, I think I would just be rotting and only intaking probably brain rot.
Yeah. Well, the other book I listened to, I also totally recommend. It was called Ask Not, The Kennedys and the Women They Destroyed. It was by Maureen Callahan. I totally recommend it because it kind of gives some insight into RFK a little bit, RFK Jr., but really just like the whole family and their history. It was crazy. I mean, like every single thing you can think of, they've been involved in and done, and kind of made me think like they might be one of the most controversial families. I mean, this is nothing like unknown, but it
Yeah.
really blew me away. So recommend that too.
Oh, okay, maybe I'll listen to it at my work because I've been on an audiobook kick too, but mostly just fiction because with all the news that's been happening, sometimes I just need to balance my brain out with mostly um entertainment within fiction, especially when the news cycle is just so intense. Speaking of the news cycle, how do you feel about this past week and just the news in general and the press?
Well, kind of like you said, I do think things are definitely happening really quickly, but like you said, it kind of is more normal this week as opposed to like Trump's first week in office. Like he's just keeping this pace up, and I feel like even if his term ended suddenly, like now, he would have still had one of the more impactful presidencies out of like the most, and I don't know, and just in terms of like the raw impact of it, he hit the ground running. I think I've heard people explain it as like making, I think it's in making moves and breaking things or something like this, and that's a pretty apt description, I would say. And actually, yeah, when I was sick and I was trying to take a walk outside just to kind of like get out of the apartment, and I saw his motorcade go right past on Constitution Ave. It was pretty crazy because I don't know, there's just like a ton of motorcycles and his little like limousine.
Yeah, I've never been that close to a sitting president. Honestly, I don't think I've been that close to any president. Actually, Trump visits Vegas every once in a while, so I guess the closest I've been to president and to Trump is within at least like probably around 8 miles.
Nice. Okay, so do you have you had some stuff to get to before we go in like right into the news? You want to talk a little bit about misinformation, disinformation?
Yes, I this week in particular, shout out to our 12 subscribers, by the way. But this week in particular, I've had a couple of friends send me things and they're like, you should cover this on the podcast. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, this is insane. Like, where did you get this information from? And I would ask them first in particular. And then my one friend, he made a joke and he was like, Abby, I'm so sorry. I fell for TikTok. The TikTok. I just fact checked it, it's wrong, and it was that like um if you're a whistleblower to ICE that you would receive $1,000, which in the moment I probably should have been like, that's insane, like that would cause the craziest, wildest goose hunt. Um, and should have maybe thought that to myself, but I honestly believed it for like the quickest second. But I was at work, so I couldn't do work, or I couldn't research it myself, and that's why I'd asked him, and he immediately said, like, yeah, that was fake. And another one was also that um, domestic violence goes up 10% on Super Bowl weekend.
Hmm.
And another one of my friends was saying, like, Abby, this is crazy. You guys should cover this, especially since I told her that we were recording it a day later. And I looked it up and that was also a statistic that was proven false. And I kind of just wanted to call this out. I don't blame them at all for this, by the way. I know that they're probably listening right now. I don't really know who to blame within this. Sometimes I kind of think really cynically and think that maybe people plant these things um, off into the social media or whatever because they want people to go crazy and stuff like that. Like, I think it's really important to recognize, even though social media is such an amazing tool to connect one another and to spread information, that there's also so much misinformation and disinformation, which are two different terms as well. Misinformation being spreading false information without knowing, and disinformation having the same or having a different impact of um, spreading information with the intention to spread information, misinform or spread wrong information, like with the
Right.
maliciously
Yeah.
to have false facts, basically.
And it is, I feel like, getting harder and harder. Like something we talked about last episode, I think, is just like you can't really take things at face value anymore. But I feel like that even, this is my opinion, I feel like that also includes Google searches because I've noticed, they're like starting to integrate AI with search. And so even like in browser searching, um, I'll just like Google something really, really easy where like maybe I'm fact checking something that I think that I do already know. And like the AI search result it's usually like borderline misinformation what it spits back at you, and I'll just like scroll right past the AI blurb because I'm like I want to see what someone had posted like on a website or written, as opposed to what the AI model generates. Because I've more than a couple of times the first result that pops up when I search something that's created by the AI is just blatantly wrong. Like it's either off topic or just wrong.
And that's why I want to say I don't blame the average person trying to even look up information, because that little AI blurb is so easy to kind of just read and run off with it. And the average person isn't going to want to search through every single link and then cross-reference and fact check things and stuff like that. And I just, I struggle to come up with a permanent solution other than being like, everyone needs to listen to independent commentators and shamelessly plug ourselves and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, I feel like at least we can like encourage people to be more skeptical and to like we can plug here and there different like media literacy techniques and things like this. But it reminds me of our advisor used to always say, if it smells like shit, it probably is. And I mean, that's a pretty good barometer just out in life. Like if something doesn't seem like it makes sense, then it probably doesn't. And also another thing we used to say a lot at the newspaper is trust but verify. Like you should take things like don't assume people are deliberately trying to mislead you, but you always have to be willing to do the extra step of like double or triple searching if you have to. Checking three, I think like three different sources saying the same thing is pretty good, pretty reliable.
And that's one of the most important things that I learned throughout the Vista. I think it has really increased my media literacy skills, and I'm really, really glad that I was a part of that because of having that skill. Like I went into it not knowing that it would nurture that part of my brain and that part of my critical thinking when I had gone into it because I just liked to write.
Yeah, and also there's probably the last thing I have to say about it, but like the more critical thinking people do, the easier it gets to critically think, is what I found. Like it's kind of counterintuitive because you think if people are running around critically thinking about like every single thing, that's going to be really costly, like on an energetic level and take a lot of time to like think things through. But I found that like the more that I the more that I force myself to think critically and instead of like relying on AI or like turning to the easiest or first solution or answer, the more that I like force myself to be deliberate about the way that I'm thinking and how my thought is like building off of each thought is building off of the last. I feel like it becomes easier as a skill. Like it's just something that it's like a muscle that you flex, and as long as you continue to use it, then you're reinforcing it rather than like using more energy.
Totally. And even now, I find myself very easily, um, or not very easily, but sometimes I find myself also being like, oh my gosh, look at this TikTok or something like that. But I definitely feel like by practicing, you just get better and better. And with that, I think that's all I have to say about that. Do you have anything else you want to talk about before getting into the topics, or?
No, I think I'm ready. So our first one this week was the press conference that Trump had with Netanyahu. I think this was on Wednesday of last week. Um, I don't know about you, but I had a pretty visceral reaction to this. I was I first saw the clip and I was just alone in my apartment and I actually like swore out loud. I was like, "What the?" And yeah, it was really like completely unexpected. I think insane what he said on its face. But basically, what he said in this conference was that he thinks that the US is going to take ownership over the Gaza Strip, which obviously has been fighting. It's been controlled but it's been controlled by Hamas, but they've been fighting Israel in this like 15 months long war. Now they have a ceasefire deal, although the ceasefire is starting to break down as we're seeing. But they had been in a ceasefire, and now Trump's saying actually, like the only way to end this war is that the US is gonna take ownership of Gaza Strip. We're gonna turn it into the
Love
Riviera
it.
of the Middle East. And that I think that was the line that I swore at because it was just so out of pocket and it felt extremely disrespectful to like the
Mm.
death, the sheer violence and horribleness that this war has brought. So what did you think at first?
I completely agree with you. It is, I also had a very, very visceral reaction to this. Like, I think I physically cringe, and also I think I said something out loud as well. I think that you had seen it or heard it before I did because I remember you texting me about it, and I didn't have time that night or something like that. And I remember at work, I sit at a little cubicle and I listened to the news all day, and I don't like have anyone around me, but I remember saying something out loud, especially when I heard the Riviera of the Middle East. Like, are you kidding? And like talking about development, I don't know. It just I'm laughing, but it's not funny. It's just more so it just seemed satirical to me. Like so
Yeah.
crazy that it borderline was satire. Like I could imagine it on like an episode of like The Simpsons or like Family Guy or something like that.
Yeah, so like I think the reason for that reaction makes a lot of sense because it's like all of this destruction and death has just occurred, and for the first time, there seems like there might be the opportunity for peace, which we talked about like 2 episodes ago. And then it's like the first thing that you're gonna think about in rebuilding is the real estate and the land development. Like, are you crazy? That I think was why it got me so angry, is because there's so many things on the list of priorities before we talk. But then again, we know that Trump is this very practical minded person. So maybe to him it's like, well, the best way to like fix the problem is to get to work and make it a better place for people. That's the charitable thing you could say about what he said. But um
He
to me it
did
was like, yeah,
it
there's so
very.
many other priorities that are top of mind when you think about that region and what they've gone through and what they need at this moment. That's why it was so offensive. But to your point about it seeming satirical, as days have gone by, I've started to wonder, like, is it satirical? Like, is this strategic? So, have
Yeah,
you thought
totally.
about that at all?
Yes, okay, so he also mentioned talking about the neighboring states pitching in, right? Like the other Middle Eastern states stepping up and kind of, if you have the wealth, like contribute to it, right? And at face value, like that statement, I think is good, right? But I just don't like his delivery of it, and also just s- inputting the US within in development and stuff, like it is just such a it's just so out of pocket. Like I'm stuttering a lot because it again I'm becoming angry again just remembering how he said that in the first place. And if we give him grace, which I don't like doing. I'm obviously very much not I don't like Trump, but sometimes I have to pull myself out of everything, right? And if you isolate this statement, I'm thinking to myself, okay, maybe he's trying to get spark something, or maybe he just wants um to spark some type of solution or something like that. But that's giving him a lot of grace, I will say that.
Yeah, I mean, so it felt like a slap in the face to people who I think were hoping that he would be a hands-off foreign policy president, which he kind of ran on that this last election cycle, as if like he would be non-interventionist, as if like he wants to take the off-ramp with Ukraine and potentially Israel, Gaza as well. So I think a lot of people voted for him for that reason, thinking that like he won't send troops overseas, he won't get the US in further entangled in foreign conflicts. And now to like say like the US is going to take the lead on rebuilding in
Mhm.
that region, like how do we get from here to here? Like that's what I want to know. But it did cross my mind that it could be this play of like he likes to like make the most outrageous negotiation first and then kind of like roll it back if he needs to. So I was wondering the same thing that you said about like maybe he's making this really, really outrageous claim first, then expecting everyone to like dogpile on him and be like, we don't agree with that. Like, no, the US shouldn't be in that region. And then he'll be like, oh, you know what? Like, we really shouldn't be in that region. Maybe Saudi Arabia, maybe Qatar, like you guys, you step in, you rebuild. And then now like the responsibility is on them. So I hope that's what happens. Although I also think the people who should be rebuilding that region should also include Palestinians who are going to be living there. Like they should have a say in how that process goes as well.
Right. And after all this war, it is really devastating what has happened to the land itself, right? Like I've seen photos of it and how destroyed it is, and I do think that states that have the means to do so should help rebuild this land. It's a humanitarian issue that I think a lot of people could put their hands on. Definitely not develop, I don't think, but I think what you were just saying, Colin, is the best case scenario. But sometimes I have to also wonder if Trump kind of just he just pushes these boundaries of saying the most insane things. And the skeptic in me also thinks to myself, what is he not saying? Like, what else is he planning on doing that might be a distraction to some other new crazy plan that he has next?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, it seems like since this is like his last term, hopefully, like that's don't even get me started on like
Yeah,
Trump's third term,
good
but
God.
he seems like he's really going for like the land grabs this time. Like he kind of made he would talk about that in his first term, but he really didn't go for it. Like he brought up Greenland, but he didn't really take Greenland, or like he brought up I don't know, like different territories he thought were nice, but he didn't actually try to take them.
Yeah, the
Um,
Gulf of America.
yeah, like in this term, is he gonna actually go for it, or is it all just talk once again? We don't really know yet. But certainly what he said on his face was very troubling. And it also like it makes me wonder. So one thing he said was, it's all just rubble. Why would they want to be there anyway? Like the Palestinians, why would they want to return? They should just go be in other countries. Like, I don't know, like who's gonna take all of them in? Jordan, Egypt? Like we don't, it's not a real plan. It's just a loose concoction of ideas that he's spewing. But um so also what are we gonna do with all the people, the Palestinians in the meantime? Is it gonna be like they're all forced into exile? Like how are you gonna move all of the like million plus people out of that region in the meantime while you're developing it into like a resort? Like where are they gonna go? Who's gonna help them get their needs met and stuff? So it's just it didn't make sense as a real implementable logistical plan, you know?
Right. I completely agree with that as well. I don't have anything else to say about this topic personally. I feel like we just kind of went on a good little tangent rant about it. That everything we just said is valid, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, probably the very last thing I have to say is just he said that he's gonna somehow do this without sending any US troops, but
Yeah,
that's just impossible. I mean, again, this is why again I think it's kind of satirical because there's no actual way he could actually enact what he said. You
yeah.
can't have it all those different ways at the same time where all the Palestinians are taken care of by other countries. It's perfectly developed and turned into the Riviera. Then they all come back and it's perfectly peaceful and no US troops are involved at any point. Like that's literally a comedic to even say out loud. So that's what makes me hope maybe it is all just a satirical play to get other countries in the Middle East more involved.
I mean, if he somehow accomplished that, he would be a hero for sure. So, what is our next topic?
I think we have
Yeah.
USAID. I personally don't want to take the lead on this, so you can go.
Okay, so we're gonna talk about the end of USAID, and let's let me give you guys a little background, our little 12 subscribers on this. Right before each podcast, Colin and I FaceTime and just kind of debrief the topics a little bit, and both of us were like we don't actually know what it does. Okay, so the actual I understand it as a concept, which is how I understand it, is that they're supposed to be an independent agency that helps out with more global humanitarian crises, like, for example, diseases and maybe food scarcity. But I don't really know by what means they do so. When I was looking up physical examples, I was telling Colin earlier that they said that during smallpox, this independence agency was able to help a lot. But I was like, how did they help? What was happening there? And yeah, and the funding's being cut for this. Colin, what about you? There's my lead on it.
Yeah, I mean, so my understanding too, like I said, pretty scarce, but it's not for a lack of trying. Like I've been all week trying to understand. what does USAID do? What was it made for? What are some of its like top achievements globally? And I have a similar understanding as you, where like it's similar to the Peace Corps, but not really, because it's funded. Like I think the people who work for USAID are like government employees who are more in like the policy realm or have a background in like administration, who are there abroad to like implement different programs and policies adjacent to government, but not like in competition with the foreign governments to kind of like bolster and support the country from within. Now, we'd also talked about how, to me, I've definitely heard before in my past, don't know from here, don't know from where, that like USAID is just a front for the CIA. Like I've heard that, I don't know, grew up in like this area where a lot of people's parents like work in intelligence and all this. So I don't know where I picked this up, but I feel like I've heard it on good, relatively good authority that the CIA has like been had its hand in USAID, which makes a lot of sense because if you were going to get involved in like foreign countries, you wouldn't just show up and be like, "Hey, we're the CIA and we're here to like keep you in check." You would show up like to do aid work and then get your foot in the door that way.
Yeah, personally, I've never really known too much about USAID. Again, I want to reiterate what Colin had brought up earlier about not for lack of trying. I even right before we recorded the podcast, I looked it up again because I was like, maybe I'm just not trying hard enough, but I really am. And I also haven't heard that conspiracy theory, but when you explain it to me, I'm like, that makes so much sense to me.
And I don't
Obviously,
have any proof of it either. So
yeah.
like me. But um but so basically the story for all of this is all is to say that they shut down USAID and it's part of like DOGE's broader effort to downsize government and expenditures and whatnot. So do you have any thoughts about what DOGE has been up to? And it's been making a lot of headlines, like not least of which this shutting down USAID.
Yeah, for in particular, I when it comes to USAID, I and what Doge has been doing and stuff, I think it's pretty valid for Americans to want to know where their money is going. I think it's a valid thing to be debating how much goes where and what where funds should be allocated, but the cutting of all of these programs all at once or the things that they've been doing just seems very fast to me. Something that I was talking to a friend about was that Trump ran on a lot of, oh, I'm going to give Americans all these jobs, but I know two people who have lost their jobs due to the cuts of funding.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I've heard a couple of people through the grapevine who lost their job with this latest cut as well. So it's kind of that's a really good dichotomy to point out. Like he's pro jobs, but not government jobs. And I think to the point about the funding aspect, like yes, Americans should know where their money is going and have an interest in that. But I feel like they've kind of just handed that off to DOGE as opposed to like Congress being the power of the purse who's supposed to be drafting up budgets and making a balanced budget ideally. And it makes me uncomfortable that they've just handed off all of their responsibility that Congress has as its own like elected body, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm curious to pick your brain about this. What do you think the ideal situation would be, in terms of that aspect then, if it shouldn't be handed off to Doge?
Um, I mean, my preference is always to have some kind of legislation. Obviously, it would be really hard to ever pass anything that like makes drastic cuts. The reason being because like Congress people don't want to have their name on the record as having voted for drastic reductions.
Mhm.
Because anytime they're up for re-election, their opponent's going to be like, "You cut funding for USAID. Like, how could you do that?" So that's the reason why Congress wants to just hand it over to this external agency or even just the executive branch more broadly because it helps their own reelection chances to delegate that responsibility when I think that's completely wrong. I think the power to make budgets was always a congressional responsibility. Um, so yeah, I mean, it doesn't make me happy the way that they're making cuts, but I am more or less happy with the idea of making these cuts. It's just how that I'm kind of hung up on a bit.
I
But
see.
so it reminds me a bit of Javier Milei. Do you remember in Buenos Aires how that was all playing out?
Yes, I actually again remember. Okay, so I was actually in a biology class at the time, but I remember you were in a Spanish class, and so you got to learn a lot more about it in present time, correct me if I'm wrong? Like you guys were talking about that in your class, right?
Yeah, so we for the listening audience, we were there in January of 24, which was like a month after Milei had gotten elected, and he was shaking things up really quickly, kind of similar to how Trump and Elon Musk are doing right now. And so it was kind of an interesting like precursor or like forerunner to what we're seeing right now with the US, but it happened in Argentina. And I remember like when we were there, people were really upset.
Really?
I was taking class from like a more like left-leaning institution, so they were kind of like harping on it, like how much they didn't like what Malay was doing. But like people were even blaming like the dengue fever was going around and people were like, it's because Malay cut the funding for the exterminators and I was like, yeah, but like dengue is a annual thing. So like I don't know in Argentina it is at least. So I don't know. People I think anytime there's like change and quick change and it makes people like uneasy, they're really quick to like assign blame and kind of project doom and gloom into the uncertainty, but I'm still open-minded with both Argentina and the US that net everything will be better for having cut back the overspending.
I remember being in that environment in Buenos Aires, and through our program, we were able to interact with a lot of people our age who were locals there. Did you guys do that too? Did you like get to do
A
that?
little bit, yeah. Well, we talked to a lot of like academics and adults, but
Yeah, we had the opportunity to like make friends and see these people like and we got to know them and honestly I hung out with them a few times within those 3 weeks. And every single person, especially the people our age, was very more like a hater of everything that was happening and very it seemed to me that everyone had left-leaning views over there within the people that I was interacting with, talking about how much more expensive things are and how their jobs they weren't getting paid enough to be able to keep up with um, the peso and the prices there. For us, I remember it would change a bit every day, and for us, it was cheaper because we were coming from the US and we have American money.
yeah, I mean, our currency was pretty strong at the time compared to
Yeah.
theirs. So we got like great deals on a lot of stuff, but
Besides the point, though.
yeah, other people were having a harder time. Although I think they did bring inflation down, and I heard that the rent prices from all the deregulation that went on with housing there, it really brought rent prices down in Buenos Aires. So like I've even joked to you, Abby, like if everything goes bad, like we go to Buenos Aires and just like rent out a apartment because it's like pretty cheap these days because they got the government out of
Mm.
subsidies for housing in the city. So we got a couple minutes left on this call. Do you want to maybe go over quickly like what's going on with the Politico Pro subscription thing?
Yeah, I saw that from my understanding that Political Pro, it's different from regular Politico, and it costs $7,000 a year for a subscription. and that USAID was funneling money to them for good stories for Democrats. That was a conspiracy that I saw. That's not proven. Um, but when I saw that, I thought that was a little funny just because I was like, did Politico really like cover Biden and Democrats like all that well? Like I don't remember them particularly posting like amazing headlines about Biden. I don't know. What about you? What did you see about that?
Well, yeah, I'd heard similar things like that they had through the government given like $8 million to Politico, but then I very quickly saw people refuting this and saying, well, actually, this was just done through like regular subscriptions. Like there wasn't anything nefarious about it at all, that it was actually just government employees paying for like this expensive pro subscription, which yeah, it was really expensive, but like if they're using it really regularly and their work is somehow contingent upon like having this knowledge, then it might make sense to buy that expensive prescription or subscription. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's really as big of a scandal as like it was made out to be. I didn't see any evidence of like actual government funneling money to Politico, and their CEO and editor-in-chief came out really strongly saying like that's not at all what happened, that it was actually just that case of like government employees paying for Politico Pro, and that's an expensive subscription. So it really adds up over a period of like I think it was like 18 years or something.
Mhm.
So I don't know the ins and outs per se, but I do know someone who works at Politico, and I meant to like text and ask what was going on last week, but then I was like, they're probably busy right now. Like,
Like they're dealing with a scandal. Maybe more will come out and we could maybe touch base next week about it.
if I hear anything, yeah, I'll bring it up. Um, and then we also want to talk about the recent state of the Democrat Party because it's kind of in an interesting place post-election. Obviously, there's an undivided government with the Republicans leading right now, which has kind of led the Democrats to be on offense a little bit. And so there was a video circulating on Friday of stuff that was happening outside of the Department of Education, which has been kind of a hot button thing recently. There's rumors that Trump is going to sign an executive order shutting down the Department of Education. And so we saw a bunch of Congress people, Democrats, I think all Democrats, outside the DOE, kind of having this engagement with the security guard. And it didn't, in my view, it didn't make them look good. Like they were kind of berating him, in my view. So he was just standing there. He was pretty calm, pretty blank. And I know like Maxine Waters was among them. And she was saying like, we're members of Congress. We need to get through. And he's like, well, you don't have an appointment. I can't let you through unless someone comes down to let you in. I can't let you go through. To their credit, the door did have, it said like all public access or all access entrance or something like this. But clearly he was positioned there not to let people through. And so Waters in particular was like demanding to see his ID, which I thought was weird because like the power dynamics of like a congressperson and a potentially federal employee, potentially outside contracted security person, like the power dynamic is in favor of the congressperson, not the security guard. So she was asking to see his ID and she was saying like, we pay your salary. And I was like, girl, like we pay your salary, he pays
Cringy.
your salary, like you're all just paying each other's salaries. I don't think that that's like the flex that she thought it was. And it made me think she looked out of touch. Um, and yeah, I mean, I don't know if you saw that happening at all. It
Yeah.
was on Friday.
I saw like videos trending on it. Um, and so I looked it up and stuff like that. And I will say that it just made me cringe because I obviously voted Democrat in this last election, and most of the time I do end up voting Democrat. even in like within my like local elections in Nevada. But yeah, that was really cringy to me. I agree with you. I think it came off as very entitled. I did not like the we pay your salary thing. I think it reflected very poorly on her leadership, on the leadership. And while like obviously like I don't know how to explain it other than that. Like it should have, I mean, if she wanted to get through, I think it should be handled more professionally. There was no reason to berate that poor security guard for who probably was just listening to whatever orders.
Yeah, and Maxine Waters has also in the past made some really incendiary comments that I just don't like, where she'll say like, if you see a member, she said, if you see a member of Trump's cabinet out in public, like make a scene, like surround them, shout, like, she's like kind of like contributed, in my view, almost more than any other politician I could think of, to this culture of well, besides Trump himself, but she's contributed to this like polarizing, this making the politics extremely personal and like there's value to it, I think. Like it makes people realize and understand like these issues are important and they do affect real people. That's what she's going for, I think. I think though it can come across in a way that it, like you said, is almost entitled, like this person like owes you something? I don't know. Like again, this is a security guard, a low-level employee talking to a congressperson. She's trying to make it seem like she's like of the people, representing the people, which theoretically she is, but I think the power is actually in her hands in that situation.
Yeah, I don't I mean, I don't know how long we can rant about like politicians being unprofessional, but because I honestly feel like we've been kind of doing this theme of them and their behavior and how unprofessional it all comes across. But yeah, I
Burn
think
you with
that's
the onesies.
I know. Like I'm thinking back to our past episodes and I'm like, I keep just critiquing these people's behaviors, like they need to get under control. But yeah,
It's like
basically.
also like what we said about we feel like it's performative. That's why I don't like it because I feel like she's out there recording this interaction, thinking it's gonna like land with the public as like she's of the people, but like we
Hmm.
know that they're not. Like
Yeah.
they all made a lot of money out of being in public service, and some more than others. But. Like when she's shouting someone down, I don't see that as her doing the people right. I see it as like another politician trying to get a sound bite because it'll help their reelection bid. And that might just be me being really cynical, but that's why I think like the security guard was actually more representative of like your everyday person who's just showing up at their job to like follow instructions and get through the day and help support their family and whatnot.
Yeah,
So
I hope nothing happened to the security guard. I didn't follow up on this on anything, but hopefully the security guard didn't get in trouble because I think that would be unfair.
do you think that it reflects a little bit like where the party is right now, the Democrats, and like where their future trajectory might be?
Yeah, I think that this isolated moment too in particular really got me thinking about how the Democratic Party needs to realign itself with one another and with their voters and with the average American person like we were talking about, right? Like not to bring up the entitlement again, but the average American person is not going to relate to I'm a congresswoman, like let me in, you know what I'm saying? And I think it's really relevant to look at the bigger picture of everything that's going on there. Like, what is their messaging nowadays? Like, what are they doing to appeal to the average American working class person other than anti-Trump?
Yeah, totally. Like positioning themselves as the anti-Trump isn't good enough. I think we've like all clearly seen that at this point. You can't just be against something. You also have to offer a vision of something like affirmative that people can really aspire to and like want to bring to fruition. So I think that that's what the Democrats have really struggled with, and it hasn't helped them in any way really in the past several years. And I'm a little bit surprised that they aren't like learning. more actively in the wake of losing the 2024 election.
Exactly that.
Um, like I don't know. They also just recently elected the new DNC chair. His name I think is Ken Martin. I had been hoping that Marianne Williamson would win that. Did you follow that at all?
Yeah, I mean, for Ken Martin, I feel like Martin could probably help with some party building from a grassroots organizing perspective, but um I don't know. The Democratic Party in general just seems so directionless to me, and we need help within reorienting ourselves in that way, and the again, like just kind of bridging the divide too between like we have like our extremists and then we have our moderates, and we need some type of middle ground, which I know a lot of people hate to recognize, but it's true. Like in a two-party system, you need that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if the Democrats, I think, have lost the working class voter, and they lost it to Trump and his brand of populism, and that's why they lost the 2024 election. But if they can somehow get the working class populist voters back on board with the Democrats, they could stand a chance. But I'm shocked that they haven't figured that out yet. Or they haven't like made any moves that indicate that they're building momentum back in that direction. Other than I think they have a really compelling case if they can like point out like, oh, look at all of the tech billionaires that he's surrounding himself with. Is that representative of you and your interests? People might see the Democrats again as like more representative of working people.
Totally, like the move to move or the movement away from corporations and recognizing individual working class citizens will totally help them with that. Um, Trump just has such a way with rhetoric. Hate him all you want, but he is just so good at marketing himself, marketing the average American, and so many average Americans voted for him because of this, and our the Democratic Party just does not have that same um power and that same influence, the same like I don't want to say intelligence, but do you know what I'm saying? Like I don't
Yeah,
want
I
to,
mean, the fact
yeah.
that he's a billionaire, but he has always appealed to working class people and that he brands himself a populist, I mean, that's in and of itself, there's a contradiction there that's really,
Mhm.
really hard to grasp. And if Democrats could start pointing that out to working class people and be like, hey, he's always been exorbitantly wealthy. Are you getting more wealthy since the 8 years ago when he became president for the first time? But they've lost that like messaging a little bit and lost working class people too.
Yeah, we should be the campaign managers for them at this point.
Well, did you see like David Hogg from the Parkland shooting is the vice chair of the DNC? Did you see that?
Yes. I know a little bit about Hogg. I know about like the gun reform aspects, but what do you think about that?
Well, I do think gun reforms could be a winning topic for the Democrats. Kind of like similar to, I think they were really banking on abortion being the issue that would drive votes to them last election cycle. I
Hmm.
think gun violence is still something that is clearly unresolved, and they sort of have like the high ground on that issue. So, I mean, obviously, in the wake of these shootings, like it's really, you don't want to see people like politicizing it immediately and being like, we need gun reform. Well, maybe, but they get accused of spinning it as like or opportunistically using tragedy to advance their political aims. That's the issue with like gun reform. But I do think that Democrats have like enough history behind them, and maybe Hogg could be a representative of that, saying like we've been very consistent that gun reform is something we need. Um, can we actually make that happen? And end like mass shooting events?
I think I think I agree with you for that point, actually. I think that gun reform is I think gun reform is definitely necessary. And I think that by running with that like hot topic issue, maybe over a maybe that instead of abortion could bode well for the Democratic Party. Abortion is definitely another hot topic issue, but unfortunately, like it doesn't affect every single American versus like if you appeal to the average American like school child or like festival building like in Vegas we have the deadliest mass shooting in ever I think happened in high school for me in a sophomore year and I I don't know one person from Vegas who doesn't have a story from that. You know what I'm saying? Like not to not to say all of this is to to have political gain, but yeah, I agree with you. I think it would be a topic that could reach more masses.
And I do think it's odd to me that like people get angry when in the aftermath of a shooting it does get political, but like it is a political issue at this point. Like this is a well-established thing that happens regularly. I feel like it hasn't worked addressing it on these other levels of analysis. Maybe there is a political solution that we could at least like try and see if it actually brings violence down. But I think the Democrats have a strong case to make that like the violence has not stopped and gone down. Like I mean, even Trump was shot last year. So
Hmm.
there's like an opportunity there that I think it might not be like, well, I don't know, maybe they could make it their driving issue and win a lot of support that way. But America and their guns, just
Yeah,
like
I think I don't want to say impossible, but I don't think that people could ban guns from like ever or from the whole country because Americans love their guns. But yeah, I totally think that this is a topic that could reach more masses than maybe abortion could, than abortion did. But I still think that abortion is one of the number one issues in
yeah,
America. That's
and
a whole other topic.
yeah, and just real quick plug for Marianne Williamson, even though she lost the DNC race. I think she has a really, notwithstanding her most recent Instagram post, I think she usually has a really good analysis on like the breakdown of why the Democrats lost the 2024 election because she was kind of shut out from the primary race and everyone
Hmm.
just assumed like Biden was the gonna be the nominee until it was too late and then they had to pull him and then they had to put Kamala up and it was just too rushed and she was very critical of that whole like process and even acknowledged that it was a little bit anti-democratic the way that he was taken out and Kamala was put up so quickly. And I think that that did lose Democrats a lot of support in the end. But yeah, they're gonna have to do a whole rebrand. I don't know. We'll see how that turns out.
Okay, so should we go on to our next topic? Do you have
Yeah,
anything else?
yeah. No, that's it.
Okay. Next
So
topic.
we had on the sheet talking about transgenderism in athletics and whether or not transgender athletes should be able to compete in the women's category. Um, Speaking of like issues that Democrats are kind of losing favorability in working class voters on, I feel like this might be one of them.
Hmm.
And we had mentioned before starting record, there was a poll by New York Times Ipsos poll that said that 79% of Americans did not think that transgender athletes should be able to compete in the women's category. And notably, 67% of Democrats also did not think so. So obviously, this is a really, really touchy cultural topic, but what do you think about the latest development on that?
So again, just saying like for my own knowledge of um what recently is in the news, I can't say that I know exactly what the Trump admin reversed in terms of like Title IX with transgender athletes because I didn't really look into it. But in the cultural zeitgeist, I know that trans people within sports, competing within professional sports, has been a topic that has a lot of fire and a lot of controversy and people believing in one side or the other. I want to say that I don't think that like that transgender people should be able to compete on the professional level of sports just because biologically the bodies are so different and the different aspects of say like uh, just the biological aspect is so different and I don't want it to sound like it's a catch-22 for me because I don't think that transgender people deserve to be discriminated against. I believe that every single person has a right to do what they want with their body, but there's this argument about their bodies, that biological argument being very different and having that biological advantage within sports, like for example, Leah Thomas. Um, And there's like the argument of, oh, why don't we create another category for transgender people to be able to compete at that level? But then there's that other argument being like, oh, well, that's othering them, which I also wouldn't want. So this is just a very honest breakdown of what I'm understanding, what I think.
Right, yeah, and I agree as well, just with all the different points that you just made. Clearly we've seen that there's a cultural shift happening right now where for a couple of years it did seem like there was trending in the direction of allowing biological men who are transgender to compete in women's categories. Like that was happening at the collegiate level for a couple of years, I think, while we were in college as well. And then that's just been reversed with this, I think executive order was how they implemented this change, I think. Um, and again, going back to the polling, you're seeing the cultural, it's a losing cultural battle for Democrats. And as part of their reassessing like what direction they should be going in, I don't think it makes political sense to keep pursuing that issue in that way. To me, I think having like the separate category, I don't like it as a solution, but if it's more inclusive than the alternative of not having them participate in either category, then I would be in favor of having like three categories. Like you can have a trans, a man, and a woman category in competition, and that way everyone is included, but it's not giving an unfair advantage to those who are biologically born male and then transition to female. Because I know like w everything that happened with Leah Thomas and Riley Gaines, as you mentioned, really became like the touchstone moment for this, where they tied for fifth place in I think like the final level of competition in college swimming, and it seemed like there was like a political push to kind of like give the trophy to Leah Thomas and put, like in the photos and all this. And it just seems like that would be unfair to me. So, yeah, I don't know how much else I really have to say about it at this point, but do you have
Yeah,
anything else?
I guess I just want to also bring up that this is obviously a very controversial thing, but I mean, according to the polls, maybe not. But within the left-leaning politics, obviously, like there's a lot of push for advocating for transgender um, sports, maybe on the more leftist views. Um, and I see the comparison a lot in comparing somebody like Leah Thomas to Jackie Robinson. And I don't I obviously think that like what happened to Jackie Rob I obviously think that that was monumental, and also that like back then like scientists were saying, "Oh, it makes sense that black people aren't included in sports because they're biologically different from white people, you know?" And it's like things like that when I think about it like that, then I'm like, am I wrong in saying it like this, how I just explained it, when I apply it to today's controversy about trans people in sports. Because I would hate to ever be on like the wrong side of a human rights issue or like an inclusivity issue. But anyway, I just wanted to also put that level of nuance
Yeah,
across.
I've certainly heard that argument as well. People have called like integrating athletics in, they've called it like the civil rights issue of our time. And so that really like puts this pressure on everyone to like make up their mind of exactly what they think about it, and like moral absolute, and it's right and wrong, and I don't know. To me, that pressure, I get reactive about it when I think that there's a whole history that narrative is not taking into account that women historically have not been allowed to participate in athletics either. Like that wasn't a thing until maybe like last century, where you started having like more opportunities for women to engage in athletics in the same way that men historically had. And so so there's an argument to be made that like that was the step forward, was allowing women to have their own leagues to compete in, their own competition, and that in some ways, um, not having like a fair playing field within the women's league might be considered a step backward as opposed to the step forward that it would be for trans people. So I just think I don't like it anytime people try to make this an absolute moral issue of like there is a right answer, and if you don't choose the right answer, then you're somehow like evil. When I do think it's more nuanced than that, as you have really explained very well.
And that is all I have to say about that. Thank you for eloquently explaining more about that too. Do you have anything else you want to add before we move on to the next topic?
No, I don't think so. I think that's all I got. We're gonna
All
talk
right.
about the Super Bowl next.
Yes. Okay. So, like we mentioned, yesterday was the Super Bowl, which is why we're recording on a Monday instead. And in general, I like giving a little the viewers a little background on me. I'm not like an avid football watcher. I watch football when I go to the actual games because my dad is a really big Raiders fan, so he has season tickets, and when he like doesn't have anyone to take, he takes me. And during the Super Bowl, mostly because it's like just a t chance to like hang out and like get together and stuff. But the Super Bowl in general, the just a rundown on the game, I guess, is the Eagles won. I did want to touch on specifically in the Super Bowl, um, Kendrick's halftime performance. I thought it was a phenomenal representation of a lot of what's going on in politics right now. For the people who don't know, Trump was in the crowd, and a lot of people who are fans of Kendrick and who are more left-leaning were like very much expecting Kendrick to do something um to Trump, or not do something to Trump, do give a message to Trump. And when I first watched it, I wasn't really thinking about it politically, even though there was so much symbolism in it. I was just like listening to him, like enjoying the music. SZA was awesome too. But I watched it a few other times too, just because I wanted to see the subtle messages that he was giving within it. And if anyone who's listening right now hasn't had the chance to watch the Super Bowl performance, I highly recommend it. There was just so much to analyze within the performance. I know I made Colin watch it today. What did you think about it?
It was great. I liked it a lot. I got chills a couple of times watching it just because I know like there's some classic Kendrick songs that he did. Humble, I think he did DNA. And then he did his new one, Not Like Us. And SZA was so good. I thought her voice was amazing. Aesthetic was amazing. I thought it was great.
Yeah, and I remember we were texting about it earlier, and Colin had said something about maybe Not Like Us being more of a nod at Trump and the Trump admin rather than just Drake. And I do think if you look deeper into the art of the performance, you could find so much um, symbolism within it. Like, for example, like the when they were all the dancers were forming the flag and Kendrick was in the middle, like people were saying that it symbolizes like the divide of America. Like I loved that he had all black dancers and I loved or at least all POC dancers. I didn't see anyone. And I loved when he had Serena Williams like crip walking. I thought that was a good nod to when people were hating on her crip walk at Wimbledon that one year. Um, I don't know. Did you have any did you have any other thoughts about that in particular?
I just thought it was very well executed all around. Like the vocals were really good. The outfit he had, I didn't like. I liked his aesthetic, and he was just wearing like blue jeans, which are obviously like very Americana, but it was artfully put together, while also still like noting the fact that he's obviously super wealthy and famous from having this really amazing career. And then yeah, like there was the red, white, and blue motif. And then you had the Uncle Sam, which I think was played by Samuel L. Jackson. So that was a really interesting nod, and a lot of like the commentary that he was talking about, you could kind of read more into like, was there a double entendre of what Uncle Sam as a character says? Um, yeah, I thought it was really good. There's certainly something that I think Trump could have taken away from it if he was paying attention, but I don't know. Yeah.
I definitely think it goes over a lot of people's heads. Some people were like really hating on it. I mean, I took a couple watches to, and I wasn't hating on it, but I took a couple watches to understand more things. And I have friends who are really big Kendrick fans, so I've been hearing takes from them too. Um, when I was typing up the notes about Kendrick's performance, I was reminded of when we talked about, sorry, Selena, but Selena Gomez being out of touch and for crying about what was it, immigration on her Instagram, which if you feel that way, amazing, whatever. But for this in particular, Kendrick was able to use his art to display a message and contribute to the overall message and political atmosphere, which obviously you don't have to do all the time, but if you're trying to make change, I believe in subtle change makes impact too. I think that it's a really important thing to do and I don't know, just the props to him.
Right. I mean, I think that great art is kind of by nature very subtle. So it's like you're presenting messages, not like in a propagandistic way, but you're presenting messages that the culture needs in order to improve itself, but doesn't want to hear. So it's like difficult and sometimes contentious subjects, but you're doing it in like a symbolic, artistic, subtle way. And sometimes I think that that's even more powerful than like getting really aggressive and loud or like literal about messaging.
Yeah. I did want to say one more thing about his performance before we move on. I saw a bunch of videos on TikTok, Instagram Reels, whatever, of a specific dancer holding up the Palestinian flag, Gaza flag within the background of the end performance, I think, of Not Like Us it was. And so many people I saw were reposting it, talking about like all this censorship and how the national TV didn't show this and stuff like that. And I have to wonder if that was planned or if it wasn't. I heard some things about like security dragging the dancer off, maybe not. I couldn't find any videos of it, but I thought that was also really interesting. It was national television, so I understand why they didn't show it because, but I think it was really that's a really strong message to send to the people within the stadium if you did see it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't watch any of the Super Bowl at all, so all this was I missed, but the halftime performance obviously I did watch, but I didn't see that part particularly because it wasn't in the broadcast itself. But you had brought it up, and I mean my stance on it is just I think censorship in general is bad. So if it was deliberately excluded in some way, like, I would disagree with it. It would probably, if it was planned and it was part of the act, then it should have been included with the rest of the artistic symbolism. So,
Okay. Do you have anything else to add about maybe this overall Super Bowl?
well, I know we're coming down to it on time. So, um, I do have a bit to say about like Taylor Swift getting booed. But I think I might save that because we do have another Taylor rant for later. So maybe we'll just punt that one. Um, I don't know. I think the Super Bowl kind of there's some epic moments that definitely like live in American history. Like I always think about Whitney Houston singing the national anthem as one of those where like just the performance of it was so exceptional that it'll kind of like forever be ingrained in our memory, in our collective memory. And I think the Super Bowl definitely has that power to it. But personally, I don't really get it. I think it's all oftentimes like very consumerist, and there's nothing wrong with that per se, but it kind of takes that to like its excess, and I'm not a fan of like excess in most senses. So that's really my gripe about it. I also just think it's a lot of people who get really into sports, like watching as a hobby. I don't really understand. I think there's a lot of like cost in terms of time to people who like make it a point to follow a team and get really into it and get really angry about it. Like I've just never understood it. I've always been more of like a sports doer. Like if I can't if I can't do the sport, I'm not interested in it, and I'm really more interested in the doing than ever watching it done. So that's just my personal stance. I think it does something for people to like witness competition, and there's I think people who have a lot of like aggression pent up in their own heads like need to see it played out on a screen to somehow like sublimate it, might be the Freudian term. Um, but again, I don't understand it because I've always just preferred doing it.
I like the unity that comes with sports watching. I like that it brings about community to cities and to people and stuff like that. Sometimes people will be like, "Yeah, I only ever talk to my dad when I'm watching sports." Like I mean, if that's your outlet, like I'm glad that that's for you. But
I mean, I'm like there's many different problems going on there that you should address before you should be watching sports, but that's
yeah, but. Again, yeah, I like the community aspect. Personally, I watch sports when it's on when people are around me or watching it. But otherwise, with the consumerism aspect too, I think America in particular in football is so commodified. Um, like even the ads this year in the Super Bowl were just so out of touch, like so out of touch. Um, but yeah, I know we're really running short on time right now. And that's all I have to say about the Super Bowl.
Yeah, well, yeah, football in general, I feel like it makes a lot of money, so people will bristle when I say that like I think it's a little bit outdated in terms of like we know it causes these head injuries that then cause people to behave more erratically and violently and yada yada. But I wouldn't be bothered if football vanished from the face of the earth,
Oh my
personally.
gosh, maybe that's the most controversial thing you've said this podcast.
I hope so.
Okay.
All right, that's it for me for this week. You got anything else?
No, I think we're good. Good episode 5 in my opinion.
Yeah, washed up, out.